We are thrilled to be here. We certainly appreciate Glance allowing us to do this. We enjoy doing these webinars. So looks like we've got a good crowd. We're going to go over a few things. Today's presentation is going to be basically on primers. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and Dwayne is also on the call. So we'll explain who we are here in just a moment. But again, we're going to talk about the proper primers to use, proper preparation. We've had a few primer changes in our lineup over the past few years, including a brand new primer that was recently released. So we're going to spend some time discussing that. Chris, I don't know if Chris is on the call or not. He was going to try to join him, but he is our global sales manager, Matthews Paint. He is actually working in shops today, so he may be out there. But Chris is he is our boss. We report directly to him, and he does a great job
He's
for
not.
us.
He's
So
not here, Paul.
he's out there. Okay, yeah, he is in shops today, and that's what's awesome about him. He gets out there in the field and does a fantastic job. Dwayne, you're on the call. I can see you. You want to tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Dwayne. Paul and I are the two tech reps for Matthews Paint, covering all of North America essentially, and go all over the place. But we're in and out of shops. We teach all of our training courses and go around and help everybody the best we can. I've been around Matthews for going on 6 years now, but a whole big long background in collision painting before coming here. So I love this business and love this industry. This is everybody works on fun and unique projects compared to automotive stuff in my eyes. So happy to be here and happy to help.
Excellent. Thanks, Dwayne. Again, my name is Paul Evans. Like Dwayne, I'm one of the technical trainers with Matthews. My background was also automotive prior to coming to work for Matthews officially about 7 years ago. But I actually was involved with Matthews training since the early 2000s. I'm based out of Florida. We do a lot of training here for the amusement parks, and we have a lot of sign business as well. So even when I was on the automotive side, I was still heavily involved with the Matthews training and the industry, which is what really drew me into this industry. And like Dwayne, I am thrilled to be part of it. It is an awesome industry. It's very unique, and you don't see the same thing every day. You go to places and see some really crazy stuff. And we're going to spend some time talking about primers, talking about substrates, and we definitely have a lot of substrates in our industry. And every week we're getting calls with something new that you're being asked to put paint on, and we try to help you. Sometimes we have an idea, sometimes we don't. It's just kind of testing involved or some guessing, but we usually try to come up with something for as many of these substrates as we possibly can. There is our contact information. So you've got our cell phones, our email addresses. We are you can reach out to us directly, but as Dwayne said, we cover a pretty big part of the world. So we're traveling a lot. We spend a lot of time in airplanes. We spend a lot of time in training classes, teaching them in shops. We may not always be able to answer that phone immediately. So I let everybody know our 800 number is, we have an awesome customer service team. They do a fantastic job. And although you can reach out to Dwayne and I directly, if you need a fast response or something like a color question, those are better to go right to the customer service number, the 800 number. And if they can't answer it, they're going to send a message to Dwayne and I, and whoever's available is going to reach back out to you as soon as possible. It's all about giving you resources and making us available, making help available to you when you need it. All right, so the topic today is about primers. Primers are going to build the foundation of any job that we do. That's where we're going to start. What do we need to do to get this ready for paint? So if we look at primers, we also refer to them as being undercoats. And if you really get into it, there's different categories of primers. There's a few that we really focus on in our industry. So let's look at a few of these different types of primers and where they're used. Etch primers. Just like the name says, an etch primer actually etches into bare metal. It does provide adhesion, provides corrosion protection, and that's done through an acid. And if you'll notice that our etch primers, they all come with their catalyst is in a plastic bottle. We can't put acid into a metal can. So that lets you know right away there is acid in there. That is what's giving us adhesion. It actually bites into that surface and creates a barrier that helps protect the metal and give us adhesion for the top coat that goes on top of it. These are not filling primers. We've had some primers in the past that were referred to as fillers. They really weren't, I guess, out there in our world, they were used that way, but they weren't really designed for filling. They are generally not designed for sanding. You can sand them if you need to, if there's imperfection, or if you just get past that top coat window, you can sand them, but that's not what they're designed for. They're designed to be sprayed on and then top coated over, usually in about 30 minutes, and depending on the temperature, usually it's considerably less than that. But that's etch primers and probably the most common in our industry. So there is a huge benefit because they are fast, they're simple to use, but there's a key word here that says bare metal. That's where we use etch primers, nothing else. And many times they're being used in places where they shouldn't. So let's talk about the next category of primers. That's going to be our epoxy primers. I'm a big fan of epoxy primers. They're so versatile. They are very universal as far as going on multiple substrates, including substrates that have been previously painted. Maybe there's some adhesion, or excuse me, adhesive components or body fillers, something that is not metal, and usually your epoxy can go right over those without any problem. So they're universal. They do give you some more fill as compared to an etching primer. We have primers that fill more, but if you're just trying to prime something and paint it, they give very good filling qualities. They have a nice long top coat window. Our epoxy primer, the 274, 528, 530, 531, that series has a 4-day top coat window. So that really gives you a lot of time before you would actually have to sand it. So very universal. They'll go on a lot of things. They are a little slower. That's the only real drawback, is that they are a little bit slower than the etch primers. And really, when you compare the two, you're talking about 15 minutes or so difference between those two. You can really top coat the epoxy in about 30 minutes as long as you put one coat on. But great product. It's my go-to. I really do like epoxy primers.
Paul,
Beyond that, we
I
have
want to add
polyester
to.
primers. Now, this is where we, yep,
Sorry,
jump in.
there's a little bit of delay apparently from the internet connection. I want to add to something you just said because it was a great point. Edge primers are the fastest primer that we have. If you want speed and production through your paint shop, edge primer is going to be the way to go. But edge primer has that restriction that Paul pointed out of bare metal only. And where shops run into potential problems with this, what we see commonly out in the shops we go into is when a piece of aluminum has to be repaired with a little bit of body filler, there's a little scratch, a gouge, or a dent that needs to be fixed. That eliminates etch primer from a possibility to be used there because there is no adhesion from that etch primer on top of that body filler. And when you apply paint over that that etch primer that isn't adhered to the metal below, it leaves an outline and a ring around whatever's underneath it, and there is no adhesion to the metal in between those two things. So that's where epoxy comes into play, and it can go over the metal and the body filler. Everything will be hunky-dory, just fine. And as Paul mentioned, got to wait extra 10-15 minutes for flash and for it to be solid enough to paint over. But given that, much better option if you're not dealing with perfectly clean bare metal only. Back to you.
Great point, Dwayne. Thank you. So with the polyester, that's where we get into a filling product. we refer to it as kind of a nickname as sprayable Bondo or sprayable body filler. And it has that same chemistry as a body filler does. And it does give you considerable amount of filling capability. It does have a lot of what's called talc, and that's what builds, and that's also what sands so nicely. Now, polyesters do get very hard. They get very hard quickly. If you've ever worked with our polyester primers and you leave it in the gun or walk away, you could have a problem. You may end up throwing that gun away. They do set up quickly like body filler. If you think about when you mix up body filler on a board and you go to apply it to the surface, oftentimes when we put too much hardener in there, before you can even get it off the board, it's already set up. And that's what can happen with polyester primer. But if you know how to use it and you use it correctly, it's an amazing product. So if you are working with very porous substrates, now let's talk about what that is. In our world, probably one of the most common things is going to be sign foam, HDU. So a lot of pores, a lot of imperfections. This product works excellent. As Dwayne mentioned, body filler. When you've got that body filler that's really just a sponge, it's going to soak things up. The polyester primer will fill that body filler. Wood, if you're working with wood and you want a nice, smooth surface, wood generally has a lot of imperfections. Polyester works very well in those cases. So that's the polyester. Don't use it if you don't need it. If you don't need fill, remember, it has to be sanded. With the etch primers or the epoxies, I'm going to rock and roll. I'm going to prime them and I'm going to paint them. I don't have that step of sanding. So use polyester where it makes sense. The other category we have with our primers is our adhesives. And I think of these more like super glue. Basically, they're clear. They're going to go on substrates when you're not sanding them. So that could be acrylic. It could be bare metal. That would be decorative metals like aluminum, brass, bronze, copper. We have adhesion promoters that go on those, where we're just going to put a clear coat over top of them to protect them, but we need something there. So adhesives or adhesion promoters, in my opinion, they're not true primers by the definition of a primer, but they do take the place of a primer and they do give very good adhesion to the substrates that they're designed to go on. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the different substrates. No filling capabilities. And again, they're not something you're going to sand. I had a customer actually called me this week and had some trash in the adhesion promoter. And I said, well, you can try gently sanding it, but it's not designed for that. Many times you might be better off just to go ahead and paint it, let that dry, and then come back and sand it, depending on how bad it is. But they are designed, they're very quick, very productive, but they're designed in areas where you're not going to be sanding or using an opaque primer.
One thing else to
All
add
right, so I
here,
met.
all the primers Paul has covered here, etch, epoxy, polyester, and our adhesives. They're all chromate free, heavy metal free. They don't get you sideways with any of the EPA rules regarding any of that stuff. Some of the older etch primers Paul mentioned that used to have the word filler in the name, but those have all been discontinued because of the heavy metal restrictions and the rules. So we have our chromate free etch primer, 74-350, and we have our brilliant white primer that's also an etch primer. Those are our two options in that category. Paul mentioned the epoxy, and then we're going to talk more about polyester after substrates.
Excellent. Very good. And what I'm showing on the screen now is our substrate preparation guide. This is on our website. And if this works properly, it should take me there. Okay, let me pull it over here. And this is right from the website. All right, let me just bump this up a little bit bigger. All right, I think that might be a little easier on your end to see. This is a fairly large book, as you'll see. Here's the index on the front page. And there's about 40 pages roughly of different substrates and what those preparation steps are. How do we clean it? What primers can we use? What's the preparation steps? If it requires sanding, what sanding grits can we use? So we won't have time on this call to go through all of these, but I would like to hit some of the most common ones. And we'll start out with aluminum. Probably the most common substrate in our industry is going to be aluminum. There's some good information in here. If you don't have our substrate guide or if you've never looked at it, I encourage you go to our website, pull it up, and you'll see there's a lot of good information here. We have this available as a booklet. If you want a printed copy, we can make those available to you as well. So this is the way it starts out. So we start with aluminum and it lists out the various primers. You'll see the first one here is Brilliant White Primer. So Brilliant White is an etching primer. As Dwayne said, we have a couple of primers and they are chromate free. The names of these two primers, I'm going to kind of scroll up a little bit more so you can just kind of see the two of them. There, I'll stop it right there. So Brilliant White, 274535, and non-chromate etch primer, 74350. I like to talk about these kind of simultaneously because they are similar products. They're etching primers. They are both 3.5 VOC. They are both chromate free. Really, the only big difference is the fact that Brilliant White is white. The non-chromate etch primer, 74350, is a greenish color, kind of a military green. It actually sprays nice. It's easy to see it going on. But in our world, many times a white primer has a lot of advantages. And the Brilliant White happens to have a dual purpose. It can be used as an exterior primer, or it can be used, we refer to interior surfaces, and that's going to be inside of a channel letter, inside of a light box. Now, that box might go outside, but it's not exposed. It's inside a closed box for reflectivity. This is a great product to use. So now you have one primer. You can prime the inside, you can prime the outside, and then the inside's done. It's white, it's reflective, and that's all you need. Is the fact that the green version, which is the 74350, it actually has more pigment in it. So it covers better. You'll see as you spray that green version, your metal will cover immediately. One good coat and it's done. Now the Brilliant White, to keep it white, we have to leave some of those ingredients out to make sure it stays nice and bright. So we can have a little bit of a transparency to it. Probably one of the biggest things is people, when they started using the Brilliant White, they were putting it on too lightly. It needs to have a good coat, and depending on the circumstances, possibly two coats. And we've found, and it's on the data sheet, that the range is going to be 1.3 to 1.6, I believe, maybe a 1.4 to 1.6, but we lean towards that higher end. Actually, I take that back. It's 1.4 to 1.8. 1.6 is in the middle, so I apologize. That is the tip size that we have found to work very good with that Brilliant White, 1.6 millimeter fluid tip. So if you're using this product, if you're seeing through it too much, maybe you're not putting it on heavy enough, but put a good coat on. 1.6 fluid tip works extremely well. And if it's an exterior product, if you don't have complete opacity in one coat, that's okay. You're going to paint over it anyway. But for interior surfaces, for full reflectivity, that second coat does make a big difference and will brighten it up quite a bit. So if you haven't used that product, I would recommend giving it a try. Great product, very productive. If you are using it inside those channel letters and light boxes, you don't need to sand it. So we make a comment right here. Abrading, which is just another word for sanding, is not required. Clean the surface, prime it, and you're done. Now, exterior, we do recommend sanding. Even though it's an etching primer, even though it's going to bite into that bare aluminum, we see a lot of aluminum out there that may not actually be bare. It may have a coating or some type of a protective film on it. So cleaning it is crucial. Sanding it is important. It's very good insurance to make sure that product is hitting bare metal when you apply it. Otherwise, like Dwayne said, if it can't reach bare metal, even if there's some kind of a coating that you can't see, it's not going to get good adhesion if that acid can't get to the bare metal. Now, the 74-350, the green version, that's a one coat application. Again, it has more pigment, it will cover better. And if you did come back and try to put two heavy coats on there, the second coat, it may have too much acid and nothing to react to because it can't work through the first coat. So, brilliant white, if you want a white primer, the 74-350. If you want a green version, it's not on the data sheet, but you can actually mix them together because they're the same chemistry, same mix ratio, and the same hardener. And it'll just give you kind of a pale green color, which actually isn't a bad color to work with. But those are our chromate-free etching primers. And another thing I want to point out, Dwayne mentioned the fact that we had a product, an older product that was chromated, that was referred to as a filler. Both of these products are higher solids than those old primers. The primers that went away did not, they were older technologies. They did not actually have the solids content that these primers do. But again, these are not filler products. They are designed to give you coverage on your bare metal, give you adhesion, give you protection, and that's it. Wayne, anything to add on the etch primers for aluminum?
The only thing I would add to that is you mentioned solids content at the very end. And just for a simple explanation of what that is, solids content is when your paint is liquid, it's got a bunch of solvents in it. And the solids content is what is left on the surface after that paint dries. So these new versions leave literally double the amount of film on the surface than what the old ones used to.
Great point. Thanks, Blaine. That'll move us into the epoxies. And the one I'm going to focus on is the 2.1 epoxies. You'll see that right in the middle of the screen. There are three different colors. You have three part numbers, a gray, white, and a black. This is, I've sprayed a lot of epoxy primer in my career. I started painting back in 1984, and I've sprayed gallon upon gallon of epoxy primers. This is my favorite by far. Very easy to work with. It sprays very nicely. It goes on like paint, and it actually looks like paint. And as we mentioned earlier, it is more universal. It'll go on more substrates. If you're spraying an etching primer on a large surface, one of the things you'll notice, especially if you're in a warmer climate, is you're going to have a lot of dust in between that overspray because they are drying faster. So depending on your booth, how quickly it's evacuating the overspray, that dust may dry, or that overspray may dry in the air, end up back on the surface as dust. And that can create problems down the road or in that paint job. Epoxy primers do have a wetter initial period. They go on smoother, they go on wetter, but you end up with a cleaner paint booth, if that makes sense. You just don't have that dry spray. If you spray this out of a 1.4 fluid tip, again, all these recommendations are on the actual data sheets, it will spray extremely well, and it does look like a coat of paint. The gray looks like gray paint, the white looks like white paint, and black looks like black paint. Now, I get questions quite often when people start spraying this primer. Well, it looks so good, can I leave it alone and just put the epoxy primer and send the job out? And the answer is no. The downside with epoxy primers is that they have no UV protection whatsoever. So although they will look good at first and they will hold up for a short period of time, they will start to break down. They will start to turn yellow. So they do have to be top coated, but they just are a great, great primer to work with. And that is also the one that has a 4-day top coat window. That's a really long top coat window. That means you can prime it today, and depending on your temperature, let's just say it happens to be 70 degrees, you're going to have a 4-day window before you would actually have to sand it when you put your top coat on. Now, if it's hotter, that time gets shorter, and we talk about that in our training classes, but that is a long window. Don't really recommend you priming a lot of stuff and letting it sit for too long, but there may be circumstances where you prime something today and you come back in, maybe it's a Friday, you come back in on Monday and you finish top coating it. So depending on the temperature, you may be able to do that. We have an old version of epoxy primers. You'll see that next. I don't spend a lot of time on those. There's a white and a black, 274908, 274808. They were good in their time. In my opinion, they're an older technology. Some people like them, some people still use them, so they're still here, but there's no advantages to those primers as compared to the 2.1 epoxy primer. All right, so I'm just going to kind of scroll through here. I'm not going to go through every single primer on here. I want to touch base on a few different top coats, or excuse me, substrates. And as you can see, there's a lot of recommendations for a lot of these various substrates.
Paul,
If
can you
anybody in
back
the
up there to
chat throws,
anodized?
I can.
Just point out the one key thing with anodized there, because we do
Okay.
run into this from time to time, that if you get a piece of anodized aluminum, that coating, that anodized coating is made to not have anything stick to it. It's super durable. It is very hard. And the other side of that is paint doesn't like to stick to it when you try to paint on top of it. So our recommendation, what I always say when I teach classes is when you look at the substrate guide, you need to read this red box at the top of each section at least one time, because there's some important information in there every once in a while. And this is one of example of that. So when you come across anodized, you got to get all that off. And sometimes it's better just to scrap it, start with just bare milled aluminum versus trying to get all anodized out of an extruded piece or something like that. So pay attention to the type of aluminum that's coming through on the jobs. And if it's got to be painted, try to get regular aluminum and leave the anodized pieces for just stuff that isn't going to get painted also.
Very good point. And you'll notice that we don't list any etch primers in this section, epoxy only, because we know that there's probably a good chance that some of that anodized coating is going to get left behind. As Dwayne said, the goal is remove it all. If you don't remove it all, an etch primer isn't going to be able to reach the bare metal. So if anything has a chance to stick to it, the epoxy will. But the best option, our recommendation, is get it off of there, and then you're starting basically with bare aluminum. Okay, I'm going to roll through here. Aluminum composite sheets, I'll touch on that quickly because these are quite common in our industry. So pre-coated aluminum, you can actually just clean them, scuff them, or sand them, or scuff them, either one. And as long as you don't break through anywhere, you can apply our top coat right directly over that. So if you do break through somewhere, you get a little bit heavy when you're sanding it, a little too aggressive, epoxy primer is a great option. So those are some options there. And you'll see many of the actual prep steps are going to be the same, repeated over and over again. So the goal is just find out, based on that substrate, which primers can I use. Steel, you're going to see epoxy primers listed first. We usually put the first ones or the primers first that we feel are the make most sense. We do have etching primers listed under steel, but my personal preference is epoxy primer. It just works better generally. It's a little bit more durable. Steel, you might have the rust issue. You may already have some rust on there. That is not, the idea is get it clean. Make sure it's all off of there. We know that doesn't always happen. So epoxy primers are a little bit more robust as far as sealing that down. But we would recommend getting everything as clean as possible. And then the epoxy primers work extremely well. Now I'm going to scroll through a couple of other subcategories. And you'll see there's steel, there's the etch primers listed. You can even use a polyester primer. And then we're going to get to galvanized steel. There's a lot of different things in this category. As Dwayne talked about, the red print that's in these boxes, you'll notice a lot of information. I'm just kind of highlighting it there quickly. I don't know if it makes it easier for you to see or not, but this is important information, especially with galvanized steel. If you are working on a project and you have, If you have an option, I prefer not to use galvanized steel. Galvanized steel is generally left galvanized because it's designed to be to stand up on its own, to have its own protection from that galvanizing. If it has been galvanized, there's oftentimes going to be oils, protective layers that are put on there, passivation layers. These are all things that can create problems. Even if it's newly galvanized, that outgassing of the zinc, those are all things that could potentially create a problem on galvanized steel. So cleaning it thoroughly, allowing it to age as much as possible, that does help you. If you are ordering galvanized steel, ask that it not be passivated. Just get the galvanized steel as it is, and then you can follow these steps. Thorough cleaning, thorough sanding, and then epoxy primers are going to be your best option on galvanized.
Hey,
So
Paul,
you'll see that the yes.
we got one question in the chat already, and we're going to leave some time at the end of this thing for a full question and answer, but this one is timely. Do we recommend spraying epoxy primer before polyester?
Oh, that's a great question. So that is, I think that's absolutely fine to do. In the automotive restoration world, that's kind of a must. Everything gets epoxy primer first, and then your body filler, which remember, we said polyester primers are very similar to body filler, same chemistry, goes on top of the epoxy primer. The important thing to note when you're going to do that, because what you're basically doing is you're priming, you're encapsulating that bare metal, and then you're going to put something on top to give you your fill, whether that be a body filler or a polyester primer. The important thing there is to make sure you allow enough time. Depending on how heavy you put your epoxy primer, it really is best, in my opinion, just to be on the safe side, wait overnight, and then you can come back. And I'm not saying you can't go faster than that, but depending on how you put it on there, if you get on that epoxy primer too quickly, that's when it can cause problems. So overnight is a safe bet. You don't necessarily need to do that process. It may be overkill in our world, but it is a good way to do things because now you've got a good protective layer underneath the polyester. And especially if it's steel, you now have that steel that has been protected. And then you put your filler on top of that. So, Dwayne, anything to add?
I want to repeat what you just said. For our world and the building of signs, not restoring a 57 Chevy, it is not needed. It's nowhere. It's not necessary to do both primers. One or the other is fine. If you need polyester, it can go to bare metal. If you just need to seal the metal and then paint on top of it, epoxy is the best choice. If you are doing both, yes, it would be epoxy first with a lot of time before putting polyester on top. Epoxy dries very slowly. Polyester dries very quickly, and you don't want to put that fast shell on top of something that's drying slower. So minimum of overnight dry before trying to put something like polyester over the top of epoxy. If you ever choose to do it, I'll repeat it a third time. This is unnecessary and overkill for 99% of all the jobs that we do in the sign world.
All right, great. Great question. Okay, I'm going to scroll down through here. You'll see the epoxies listed. I'm going to get down to stainless steel. Now, I realize stainless steel probably isn't a common substrate, but every once in a while, you're going to have something. I get calls on a fairly regular basis of what do we do with stainless steel? And I've heard everything in the world out there as far as every kind of primer or adhesion promoter. But we only have one recommendation. And you will notice it's the 2.1 epoxy primers. Again, this is a primer that is very durable. It holds up well, and it is the only recommendation we have for priming stainless steel. Now, one thing I do want to point out here, again, most of these steps are very similar over and over again, but here's an exception, 80 grit. So with most bare metals, we can go 180 to 320, somewhere in there. But now we're looking at an 80 grit. Stainless steel is just so hard. We need to make sure we're putting a good thorough sand scratch on there. So clean it good. And by the way, I hit that earlier and I wanted to expand on it a little bit and I forgot. The reason that we clean first before we start sanding, and only have to clean it again, we clean it first to make sure we get all those contaminants. Anything that could be on that surface, we want to get it off before we start sanding it, regardless of the substrate. If you're going to start sanding something, our step is always, our first step is always going to be clean it first with the appropriate cleaners. And you will see those cleaners listed on each one of these substrates. It prevents you from driving contaminants down into the substrate. It also helps protect your sandpaper and make your sandpaper last longer and cut better. So clean it thoroughly, sand it thoroughly, clean it again, and then epoxy primer, and it works great on stainless steel. All right, I'm just going to kind of roll through here, just like you did on the last one. Any questions about a specific substrate, you can jump in there in the chat, and we'll either cover it or back up to it. Steel and aluminum repairs. This is when we actually have something that is already painted. And you'll notice there's our 2.1 epoxy primer. There's a theme. If you haven't picked up on it yet, there is a theme. 2.1 epoxy goes on a lot of substrates. And it is, especially if you have multiple substrates you're doing at one time, this is a product to use. The only thing I really have found that it doesn't stick well to is acrylics, and plastics can be a challenge to put epoxy primers directly to them. Other than that, epoxies work extremely well. So I'm going to scroll through here. I'm watching the clock. I know there's some other primer or other substrates we want to talk about. So I'm going to get down to HD. Here's body filler. And I can see that this is our live version of our substrate guide. There will be a change to it. There is a new version. I'm making a note right now, so we need to get the updated one on the website, because there is a primer that is missing here. But there's your polyester primer. I've kind of skipped over it, even though it's been mentioned a few times. This is the 6001. This has been around for a long time. It can be used on a lot of substrates, but don't use it unless you really need it. And here's a good example of where it works really well. Body filler. So this is a polyester primer. It acts differently. As I mentioned earlier, it gets very hard. It has to be sanded. I'm going to spend more time at the end. This is one of our key focus in this webinar on the polyester primer. So other than the fact that it works great on body filler, that's about all I want to touch on right now. And I want to scroll through a few more of these, and then we'll circle back and spend some time on the polyester. PVC, we can paint PVC quite easily, but you will notice something. There's polyester primer mentioned, but on the PVC, and this call I had a call on this yesterday. Stick to the edge. If you have that cut expanded PVC, that rough edge that's very porous, this is a great product to use. But remember what I said, it's hard. It's not flexible. Keep it on that edge. And this is where I would recommend using a roller. That way you can keep it confined just to that edge. Roll the 6001, let it dry, generally an hour and a half, depending on the heat, or the temperature. It may be even sooner than that. But you just scuff it or sand it to whatever level you need it. And then you can do the face of the PVC as normal. And Tybond is a great primer for the PVC. But that's just another place where you can use a polyester primer. But don't put it on the face, because it can lead to problems with the PVC expanding and contracting, and that polyester being just too hard to move with it. On the side, it's fine. On the face, stay away from it. Okay, let me roll through these. And I want to get down to, and there's wood. And again, you will see some special considerations when it comes to working with wood. So as Dwayne mentioned, take some time, read through here. If you're going to be working on one of these substrates, make sure you know all of our tips and tricks. And here is HDU foam board. So high density urethane or polyurethane foam board, very common in our industry. Another great place to use a polyester primer. So these are all places where we would use a filling primer, and this is going to be a great product to use. So what I want to do now, I'm going to get out of here and come back over here. And let's spend a little bit of time talking about our latest product that was just released. I guess a few months back, I can't remember now, but the High Build Polyester Primer Surfacer 6002 SP. So this is taking the place of your 6001. If you're familiar with 6001, this is a better product. Everything about it is really better. So we'll talk about a comparison between the two. But the 6001 has been discontinued. So if you've been ordering it, you're probably not getting it. The 6002 will be a direct replacement for that product. Newer technology, still a polyester product. And one of the things about a polyester primer is you will know it by its smell. You can't get away from that. It is that Bondo or body filler. That's the smell that you smell. It was one of the things that's unique about these products, but they have a unique smell to them. So the 6002, there's a sales sheet. I'm actually going to pull up the data sheet here. I believe this will work. There we go. And let's get that. So I'll do a little comparison between the two here on the next slide, but the data sheet is on the website. So if you do get 6002 in place of 6001, it'll be similar, but not exactly the same. And one of the first things you'll notice, the old product, the 6001, came with 4 little tubes of the hardener or the activator. The 6002 comes with 2 bottles, and those are 2-ounce bottles. So you're going to end up with 4 ounces of activator total per gallon, and that comes with the gallon when you order it. So if you do a little quick math in your head, if I've got 4 ounces and I've got 4 quarts of primer being a gallon, it's going to be one ounce per quart. Now, when it comes to a polyester primer, if you've ever worked with the body filler, as I mentioned before, and you start to work that body filler, you start to mix the hardener into it. If you've gone too far, if you put too much in there and you can't get it off the board before you can get it on the panel, you put too much in. So you remix it, you put in less, you get more working time. As long as the product is in there, and I would say anywhere from half the recommended amount to the full amount, it is going to kick over. But if you leave some of that hardener out, it'll give you more working time. So it depends on the size of the job. How far are you trying to go? How much time do you have to work with it? That's how you'll decide, should I use a little less? I want to be very clear. This is the only time that you'll ever hear Dwayne or myself say that you can change the amount of hardener because it's a little different product. The chemistry here is much different than our primers or our top coats. It is going to kick over and you can control it by how much of that product you put in there. So just keep that in mind. You will notice if you've used this product, let me see. I want to focus on a few things as we go. Here's an important note. Don't try to strain this product. If you're using a paint gun with a strainer in the cup or a disposable cup system with the strainer built into it, remove those strainers before you try to spray it. This is a very thick product. It's designed to fill. It has all that talc in there, as I mentioned earlier. So therefore, it was not going to go through a strainer very well. So pull that strainer out. So that's an important thing to note. And then your gun size recommendation. So anywhere from a 1.4 to a 2.0, I really like it out of a 2.0 fluid tip. That's a large fluid tip for those of you that are familiar with spray guns, and that number should mean a pretty big fluid opening because it's going to put some product out. But it does a really good job with this thicker product. As you work through the data sheet, you'll see recommended film build. Generally, 2 to 3 wet coats is going to be good. And we have a drying time section, dry to sand, about an hour and a half, depending on how heavy you put it on, depending on how much activator you use. That's just a general guideline. You'll know this product when it feels nice and firm and you can start to sand it and it powders up, you know you're ready to go. So there's a lot of variables, but it'll let you know when it's ready. And if it's still soft, just give it some more time. It kicks over quite quickly. So that's the data sheet. I'll just do one more thing here. We'll open this up to some Q&A. So just to compare the two, when you look at the 6001 and 6002, this is really what it comes down to. Pot life with 6001, very short. It says 30 to 40 minutes, and I guarantee you at 30 minutes, you need to be starting to pour that product out of your gun and cleaning it. With the 6002, you've got a good hour. That's a much more reasonable working time. So you don't have that fear of it kicking over in the gun before you get it out. Solids content. You can see we go from 51.9% with 6001 up to almost 78%. And that's that solids that Dwayne mentioned. That's what's left behind when all that solvent comes out. That's the product that's left behind. That's why this is a high build polyester primer. And VOC, it's actually lower in VOC. So it's just a more environmentally friendly product. And aside from that, I will say this, from working with this product, I think it sprays better. I think it sands better. But you decide that for yourself. You'll get the product, try it, and let us know how it works for you. So
excellent.
With that said, unless Dwayne has anything else to add, we'll open it up to some Q&A.
We had a couple of quick minor questions in the chat that I was able to respond to by chat, or that you answered while you were talking, Paul. So yeah, open it up to the rest of the floor. Bria, if you don't mind allowing questions to come through. I don't know how you do that, if people can speak or if they should type them in the chat.
I have one person's hand raised. Let me let them talk 1 second. I don't see my hand raiser. Oh, there you are.
Jason.
Jason, you're on mute, sir.
Yep.
There,
Bottom left.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
We got you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jason.
Question. So on the 6002, you were saying to take the strainer out.
That's correct.
Okay. Are you supposed to do that with the 6001 as well?
That is correct. It'll spray for a little while, and you'll notice the gun will start to starve out if you leave that strainer in there. And some of our shops will end up using a strainer actually designed for waterborne paint, which we don't recommend, but it just happens. And that's a finer mesh, yeah, and you're going to get very little out of it. So usually you learn pretty quickly, oh, wait a minute, this isn't working. So yes, that's been a recommendation with that product as well.
Okay, yeah, because every time I spray with the 6001, I've always left the strainer in there, but that was something good to know, I guess.
All right, say that again, Jason. You always strain it?
No, I never strained it before, so
I got you.
I was asking. That was good to know. Never knew you were supposed to take the strainer off while spraying that.
All right, very good question, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we got several questions coming in here, and we got some good ones. So, Kayla, I'm going to leave you for a little bit later, asking about acrylic. We'll circle back to this one. Christina is asking, has our Matthews book been updated with all the changes we have been doing? I'm assuming you mean that substrate guide that Paul pulled up and presented, and that is updated, and the new version will be uploaded onto the website soon. Yep. Next question from Sandy. When will Matthew 6002 SP ship out? It's been on back order for a while now. We were expecting this one. Yes,
We were.
that is the case. We launched this product and response has been overwhelmingly positive to it. So unfortunately, our launch batch was a bit smaller than the demand for it as it came out. More is in the process of being made as we speak, and there should be some in stock at least as early as next week. And then after that, another batch is following as quickly as we can get one made. Stay in touch with your sales rep, your Matthews rep that covers your geographic area, and they can give you updates as we find those out. They can give you updates on the timing there. Chuck is asking, can you get a copy of this recording? So Brea, can you share this recording with any of the attendees?
For everyone who would like to see the recording, I will have a copy of this on our Glance YouTube page. So as soon as this is over, I will be uploading it to there.
Excellent.
And I can get some individual copies with the link to your rep as well. So.
Excellent. Kristen has asked, can 6002 be used with SV and LVS? Go ahead, Paul.
That's a big yes. It works on with any of our lines. So that's a great question. And it does work with all the lines. It is, again, extremely low VOC product anyway, but it can be used anywhere in the country from a VOC standpoint, and it works with any of our top coats. So great question. Keep in mind that, as I said earlier, this is a primer that will always be sanded before you would top coat it. So technically, you could put anything over it because you are going to let it dry, sand, and have a mechanical scratch. But yes, it works with all of our lines.
Excellent. Mike asked, can you put polyester straight over etch primer, or do you need epoxy then polyester?
Great question. You want to answer that,
Yep.
Dwayne?
No, go ahead. You got it.
Okay. So a great question. I should have hit that earlier. The answer is no. Etch primers will only be used, again, bare metal underneath and top coat on top. So we're not going to put any other primers over etch primer. That includes epoxy or the polyester. So etch is always going to be by itself and then get top coated directly. So as Dwayne mentioned earlier, I think he covered the epoxy pretty well as far as if you want to put epoxy down first, you could, but not required, I should say. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay. So clicking around, Marcus asked about receiving a copy. Brea answered that already. Can we get a link to the PowerPoint? Paul, we can share this PowerPoint.
Yep, I will send that out. I can send that to Brea, and then she can do it what she wants. I'll do that right after the call.
Thanks, Perry.
Perfect.
Perry just wrote into the chat and says, greetings from Rough Neon Signs. Thanks for the info. Thank you very much, Perry.
Awesome.
But circling back to the top, the first question in here, Kayla asked, what is the best primer for acrylic substrates?
Fantastic. So the best primer is really going to be our Tide Bond. That is what Tide Bond is designed for. We still have both versions of the Tide Bond. We have the 74777. That's an older version, higher in VOC. Then we have the newer version, the 274777. They're both called Tide Bond. The part number is a little bit different. What I like about the 274 version is it's ready to spray. It is low in VOC. It's basically zero VOC. It's ready to spray right out of the can. And that is the best product to use on acrylic. So, and that's listed in the substrate guide. I know I kind of rolled through there quickly, but go pull up a copy of that substrate guide and you'll see that listed right in there.
Wow. Mike just asked an excellent question. So in the scenario, if you end up needing to do body work after the etch primer, what would be our process?
Well, if that happens, the real key there is making sure that etch primer is thoroughly dry. So remember, we're spraying etch primer and painting over it generally in 30 minutes or less. So it still has that wet on wet time period. If it is something that has been previously painted, for example, we sprayed etch primer on it, we painted it, it got damaged, we have to do a re-repair. That's not an issue there because now it's fully cured, it's fully dried. It's when it's in between, it's those early stages that it can create a problem. So the more time, the better. If it's had, I'm going to say, and there's so many variables, so I don't pin me down on when something is fully cured. But usually the majority of the curing has taken place in the first 3 days. So anything after that, you should be fine. Less time than that could be a potential problem. But usually after a day or so, again, if the temperature is up, we've had some cold weather here last week. Nothing would dry. For us in Florida, that's pretty bad. But if the temperature's up a little bit, probably by the next day you're going to be okay. But there's always that unknown on that initial period. Those first few days could be a little tricky. So hopefully that makes sense.
I think so. Makes sense to me. Go ahead.